If you never saw part 1, here is what you missed. A pregnant woman named Claire Donovan lived in a house she didn't know was hers. Not just any house, a $500 billion estate sitting on 4,000 acres of the most mineral-rich land in the continental United States. Lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements that governments and defense industries would pay anything to control. Her father, Richard Harrington, one of America's most private billionaires, had placed every inch of it inside an irrevocable trust in her name before she was old enough to understand what a trust was. He built it from his deathbed. He built it because he loved her, and because he knew, the way fathers sometimes know, that someone would eventually come for what was hers. He was right. Her husband, Derek Donovan, had spent 3 years running a massive government contract fraud operation with his business partner Troy Acaffer. Money laundering, shell companies, $43 million moved offshore. 3 of those shells registered to Claire's home address in her name, without her knowledge, positioning her as the fall person the moment everything collapsed. While Claire attended a prenatal appointment, seeing her baby's heartbeat for the very first time, Derek changed the locks, had his mistress Vanessa Cole move into the estate, and let his mother Margaret Donovan pack his pregnant wife's bags. When Claire returned to her own home and rang the bell at her own gate, Margaret came through the door and threw those bags at her shin. Claire made one phone call to her father's attorney, Nathan Cross, who had been waiting for that call for years. What Nathan opened on a cafe table that night reorganized everything. The trust, the mineral rights, the emergency protective clause on page 47 that authorized the removal of all unauthorized occupants within 72 hours. Claire gave her testimony to FBI agent Cole Whitfield. Troy's fingerprints were found on a burner phone used to coordinate an attempt to run Claire off the road in the dark. Derek and Troy were arrested. Vanessa was evicted. Margaret, who had sold her own home and moved in as if she owned the place, found herself standing on police station steps with nowhere to go. Claire walked back into her home, her father's home, her daughter's inheritance. And then Nathan opened a second folder. A 4th shell company, $43 million. A Cayman account registered to a name nobody recognized. Someone above Derek and Troy who had known about the Harrington mineral rights for 2 years and had been quietly circling the estate like a predator, drawing a patient, invisible perimeter around something it intends to consume. Claire closed the folder and said 3 words. Then we move first. That was part 1. What happens when the man behind the curtain turns out to be one of the most powerful politicians in the United States? What happens when the mistress you evicted comes back, not to beg, but with evidence that changes everything? What happens when they freeze your assets, attack your attorney, and try to take your home a second time using the law itself as a weapon? And what does a woman do? What is she truly, finally, completely capable of when she has a newborn daughter in her arms and $500 billion at her back and absolutely nothing left to lose? Part 2 starts right now. The estate was quiet in the way it had never quite been quiet before. Not the tense, walking on eggshells silence of a house occupied by people performing normalcy, but the deep, settled quiet of a place that has returned to its rightful owner and exhaled. Claire sat at the dining room table in the morning light, a leaner pressing insistently against her ribs, Nathan's second folder open in front of her. She had slept 4 hours. Her arm was still in its sling. There was chamomile tea she hadn't touched, which felt like a pattern she needed to break. "Say the name again," she said. Nathan, across the table, said it carefully. Senator William Hatch, 3-term senator, sits on the Defense Appropriations Committee, controls directly or indirectly which companies receive federal contracts in the defense and clean energy sectors. He paused. Including the government infrastructure contracts that Donovan Acaffer was inflating. Claire was very still. He wasn't just watching Derek's fraud. No, he was using it. Nathan slid a document across, a timeline, assembled by a forensic accountant the trust had retained overnight. Hatch has known about your father's mineral deposit for 4 years, Claire, before your father's private geological survey was formally completed. He had an informant inside the surveying firm Richard hired. When your father died, Hatch identified the opportunity, a grieving daughter, a trust structure that could theoretically be compromised from the inside, and land sitting on top of enough rare earth mineral reserves to make every defense contractor in Washington want to own the man who controls access to it. Claire looked at the timeline. Her father's death date was printed on it in plain black type, and seeing it in a document like this, not in a card, not in a memory, but in a forensic timeline as a data point in someone's operational plan, produced a specific cold anger she had not felt before. Not the hot grief anger of betrayal. Something quieter. Something that didn't need to raise its voice. Derek was recruited, she said. 18 months before the operation launched. Hatch's people assessed Derek's profile, his vanity, his financial desperation, his marriage to you, his domineering mother who would do anything to secure her son's position. They activated every pressure point simultaneously. Nathan looked at her directly. Derek has never spoken to Hatch. Not once. There are 3 handler layers between them. Derek doesn't know the senator exists. Which means Derek can't give him to us. Not directly, no. Claire stood. She moved to the window, the bay window, the same one she had stood at watching Derek's Mercedes reverse away on the last ordinary morning of her life. She looked out at the land, 4,200 acres. Her father's love made physical and permanent. Beneath it, right now, everything that had made her a target. Then we build the case from the other direction, she said. We find the handlers, we follow the money upward, and we don't stop until we're standing in the same room as William Hatch with enough evidence to end him. Nathan nodded slowly. There's one more thing. He looked at the folder. We're not the only ones who want to find him. Claire turned. Someone else already knows, Nathan said, and she's been sitting in a hotel 3 miles from here for 36 hours waiting to see if you'll take her call. Claire already knew who it was before he said the name. Senator William Hatch had been in Washington for 22 years, which was long enough to understand that power is not about what you own. It is about what nobody can prove you own. He was 61, silver-haired, with the carefully maintained physical presence of a man who understood that in his profession, appearance was governance. Broad shoulders, a firm handshake calibrated to communicate both strength and warmth simultaneously, a laugh that arrived at precisely the right moments in conversation and never felt forced because he had practiced it for so long it had become genuine. He had a wife who appeared beside him at exactly the right events. He had a Labrador named Liberty, who appeared in exactly the right photographs. He had a chief of staff named Raymond Carr, who made exactly the right problems disappear. Hatch had built his career on a single, foundational understanding. The future of American power ran through rare earth minerals. Whoever controlled the supply chain controlled the weapons, controlled the energy grid, controlled the leverage points that determined which countries America could pressure and which it could not. He had spent 12 years on the Defense Appropriations Committee positioning himself as the indispensable bridge between government need and private supply. The man every contractor called first, the man every foreign delegation approached through back channels, the man whose name appeared in no public record of any transaction, but whose fingerprint was on everything. When his informant inside the Harrington surveying firm delivered the geological report, 4,000 acres, lithium, cobalt, 3 additional critical elements, conservative valuation $500 billion. Hatch had read it twice in a secure room and then sat very quietly for a very long time. This was not money. This was structural power. Whoever controlled this land controlled a piece of every defense contract, every clean energy initiative, every negotiating position America would hold for the next 50 years. He needed it, and he needed to obtain it in a way that left no fingerprints. Enter Raymond Carr, who knew a man who had assessed the Donovan situation and seen everything Hatch needed. A weak man married to the right woman, a domineering mother willing to do anything to elevate her son, and a grieving daughter who trusted too freely and looked in every direction except down at the ground beneath her feet. This morning, Hatch sat in a secure briefing room in Washington and listened to Carr deliver the update with the contained, professional calm of a man who has delivered bad news to powerful people for 20 years and understood that how you frame the information is as important as the information itself. Derek arrested, Troy arrested, the eviction failed, the trust intact, the FBI case building, and now Nathan Cross requesting Claire Harrington Donovan's full trust documentation from 3 separate legal archives simultaneously overnight. She was building something. Hatch was quiet for a long time after Carr finished. How much does she know? She knows about the 4th shell. She knows about the Cayman account. Carr paused. She doesn't yet have a name. Hatch nodded slowly. 22 years in Washington had taught him one thing above everything else. The moment a problem becomes visible is the moment you stop managing it quietly and start managing it aggressively. Activate the judge, he said, and find me something in the trust instrument's founding documentation that we can use to challenge its validity. He stood. She wants to move first. Let her. People who move first in the open are easier to stop than people who move quietly in the dark. He looked at Carr. We move in 72 hours. He walked out. His Labrador, Liberty, lifted its head from the floor and watched him go. Vanessa Cole looked nothing like the woman who had opened the Harrington estate's front door in a silk robe 11 days ago. She was sitting in the armchair of a mid-range hotel room when Nathan brought Claire to her. No silk, no leather portfolio, no practiced confidence. She was wearing plain dark clothes and the specific, stripped expression of a woman who has had 36 hours alone with the full truth of her own situation and has arrived somewhere on the other side of denial. There were shadows under her eyes. The diamond tennis bracelet Derek had given her was gone. She'd sold it the morning after the eviction to cover the hotel. She stood when Claire entered. Claire looked at her, said nothing, sat, waited. Vanessa sat back down. She looked at her own hands for a moment, then looked up. I'm not here to apologize, she said. I know what I did. I know what I was. And I know you don't need anything from me emotionally. She reached into her jacket pocket and set a flash drive on the table between them. I'm here because the man who sent me into your home is about to do something that makes everything Derek did look like a parking violation. And the only person who can stop him is you. Claire looked at the drive. Start from the beginning. Vanessa started from the beginning. She described the approach, a recruiter who contacted her through a professional network, offering a contract that paid 3 times her consulting rate to get close to a specific target and gather specific information. She described what they asked for, the trust's legal structure, the names of the trustees, any documentation she could access about the mineral rights assessments. She described feeding that information upward through a chain that she had assumed terminated somewhere in the private sector. When did you understand it went higher than that? Nathan asked. When Derek was arrested and my account was emptied in the same hour, Vanessa said. Not frozen, emptied, swept clean. That's not a corporation protecting itself. That's someone with the kind of access that doesn't require a court order. She nodded at the flash drive. 2 years of recordings. Every conversation Derek and Troy had in the estate study. I had a device in there from week 2. Derek discussing the fraud with Troy, Margaret registering the shells, and 3 audio files of a handler, a man named Carr, directing the operation, telling Derek which documents to forge, which accounts to use, which timeline to follow. She paused. I recorded everything because I learned a long time ago that the people who hire you are always more dangerous than the people they send you after. I wanted insurance. Carr, Nathan said. Raymond Carr. Senator Hatch's chief of staff, Claire said quietly. Vanessa stared at her. You already know. We know the account. We know the structure. We didn't have the voice. Claire picked up the flash drive. She held it in her good hand and looked at it the way you look at something small that contains something enormous. Why are you giving this to me? Vanessa looked at her steadily. Because he tried to have you killed on that road, and I was the reason you were vulnerable enough to be in that position. A pause. And because he will do it again. To you, to anyone who gets close enough to threaten what he's built. And I am not willing to spend the rest of my life knowing I helped him get there and did nothing. The room was quiet. There are 5 words I need you to say, Claire said. On the record, with Nathan present. Vanessa met her eyes without flinching. I know who sent me. Agent Cole Whitfield had been in federal law enforcement for 16 years and had developed, over that time, the ability to deliver devastating information with the same facial expression he used to discuss weather. It was a professional skill. It protected people from the secondary trauma of watching someone react to what they were telling them. He used that face now, sitting across from Claire in the FBI's field office conference room, a printed financial document on the table between them. We found it buried inside Derek's personal financial records, filed 6 months ago. He slid it across. A $2 billion life insurance policy. The insured, Claire Elizabeth Harrington Donovan. The beneficiary, Derek James Donovan. He paused. It was taken out 2 months after the geological survey results were internally confirmed. Claire looked at the document. She had thought, after the eviction and the crash and the asset freeze threat and the revelation about Senator Hatch, that she had reached the outermost boundary of what this situation could show her. That she had seen the full shape of it and could now operate within that shape with complete information. She had been wrong. The attempted murder on the road, she said, was not only about silencing a witness, Whitfield confirmed. The fraudulent transfer document, the forged one, was backup. If the murder succeeded and Claire Harrington Donovan died, Derek inherited the estate through the insurance policy and a claim of spousal right that the forged document was designed to support. 2 simultaneous angles of attack on the same target. He looked at her steadily, running in parallel the entire time. The room was very quiet. Nathan, beside Claire, had the expression of a man doing controlled breathing to keep his composure professional. His hands on the table were flat and still, which meant he was working hard at something. Claire looked at the insurance document for a long time. She read Derek's name on the beneficiary line. She read the policy amount. She read the date, 6 months ago, around the time she had been celebrating hitting her 2nd trimester, buying things for the nursery, tentatively, carefully allowing herself to be happy. She had been lying in bed on the night this document was filed, probably with her hand on her belly, thinking about names. Derek had been filing paperwork to profit from her death. The baby pressed against her ribs. How long before he makes bail? She asked. Her voice was completely level. Given the charges and the attempted murder evidence, he's looking at extended remand. His attorney is filing motions, but the murder conspiracy charge significantly complicates the bail argument. Whitfield looked at her. You're safe, Claire. Not worried about me, she said. She looked at him directly. I'm worried about what Hatch does when he realizes his operation is dismantling from the bottom up and decides he needs to accelerate. She placed Vanessa's flash drive on the table between them. Run voice analysis on the car recordings. I need confirmation within 48 hours. She stood. And Cole, monitor the federal judiciary. Hatch is going to come at us through the courts. He's been in Washington long enough to have judges. She picked up her bag. He's going to move within 72 hours. We need to be ready before he does. She was right about the timeline. She was wrong about one thing. He moved in 48. The motion arrived at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, filed in federal court by a law firm Claire had never heard of, citing a judge she didn't recognize, under a case number that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. Nathan called her before she'd finished her first cup of tea. His voice had the specific quality of a man delivering information that he needs to get through quickly before emotion catches up with the words. Emergency motion to freeze all assets connected to the Harrington Irrevocable Trust. Filed this morning. Judge Arthur Pennell, Southern District. The grounds fabricated, but legally sufficient to trigger the freeze pending a hearing. Allege that the trust's founding geological survey data was fraudulently obtained, and therefore the trust instrument itself was established on fraudulent foundations. Claire set down her cup very carefully. Pennell. Hatch connected. He's ruled in Hatch-adjacent cases 3 times in the last decade. Never a direct line, always 2 or 3 degrees of separation. Always deniable. Nathan paused. Claire, effective as of 9 a.m. this morning, you will lose access to the estate accounts. The legal instruments will be frozen. The trust's protective provisions will be suspended pending the hearing. The estate itself. A beat too long. You won't be removed physically, but without the trust's protections active, any legal challenge to your occupancy becomes significantly more viable for the period of the freeze. She stood at the bay window. The morning light was doing what it always did, pouring gold across everything, making the land look warm and permanent in hers. In 4 hours, a document filed by a judge she'd never met at the instruction of a man she'd never spoken to would make that light a lie. How long does the freeze last? Until the hearing. Pennell has calendared it for 72 hours from now. 72 hours. The same duration as the emergency protective clause that had removed Derek and Margaret and Vanessa from this house. Now that number was being used against her by a man who understood the architecture well enough to mirror it as a weapon. He's been studying the trust, Claire said. For 2 years, Nathan confirmed. She called Whitfield immediately after hanging up. He already knew the FBI had flagged the filing within the hour. We need the voice analysis on Carr's recordings accelerated, she said. We needed it yesterday. If Pennell rules against us at that hearing, Hatch gets the legal foothold he needs to challenge the trust instrument in full, and that becomes a years-long litigation process that ties the mineral rights in knots while he continues positioning his people around the estate perimeter. The analysis is running, Whitfield said. We have something, Claire. The voice, it's Carr. We're 94% confident. I need 2 more hours for the lab to sign off on a court-admissible figure. You have one, she said. She hung up. She stood in the living room of the house her father built for her. The house that had tried to be taken from her twice now, once by a weak man with a forged signature, and once by a powerful man with a compliant judge. She looked at the mahogany frame above the fireplace, her father's note card beside it. Everything I built for you. She put her hand on her belly. Eleanor kicked once hard, deliberate, wonderfully stubborn. I know, Claire said quietly. I know. She picked up her phone and made the call she had been holding in reserve. The one she hadn't wanted to make. The one that required sitting across from the last person she wanted to sit across from. She called Nathan. Tell Margaret, she said, that I'm ready to hear what she has. For 72 hours, Claire lost access to everything. Not the physical house. She remained inside it, technically, legally, by the thinnest available margin. But the accounts were frozen. The trust's protective instruments were suspended. The legal architecture her father had spent his final months constructing sat immobilized inside a federal court order signed by a man who had ruled in favor of William Hatch's interests 3 times in the last decade, and saw no reason to change his methodology now. She sat in the nursery on the second evening of the freeze. The pale yellow walls, the paper star mobile her mother had helped her hang, the half-assembled crib she had not yet had the physical capacity to finish with one arm in a sling. She sat in the nursing chair she'd bought 6 months ago from a small shop downtown, chosen because it was the exact shade of honey oak her father's study had been. And she sat with her hand on her belly, and she allowed herself, for the first and only time in this entire story, to feel the full, unguarded weight of being tired. Not defeated, tired. There is a difference, and she knew it, and she sat with the difference carefully because collapsing it in either direction would be a lie. She was 8 months pregnant. She had been evicted from her own home, survived a car crash in the dark, discovered her husband had taken out a policy on her life, identified a United States senator as the architect of a 2-year operation against everything her father built, and was now sitting inside a 72-hour asset freeze engineered through a compromised federal judge. She had a fractured arm and 4 hours of sleep, and a flash drive in Nathan's possession that was either going to save everything or prove insufficient, and leave her fighting this in court for years. She was tired. She let herself be tired for exactly 40 minutes. She timed it. She sat in the honey-oak chair in the yellow room with the paper stars turning slowly above the unfinished crib, and she was tired, and she let it be real, and she didn't perform strength for anyone because there was no one in the room to perform it for. At the 41-minute mark, she stood up. She went to the dining table. She opened her laptop. She opened Nathan's email containing the complete Harrington Trust founding documents, every page, every addendum, every sealed instrument. She began reading from the beginning, looking for something she might have missed. Some provision, some mechanism, some piece of her father's extraordinary legal foresight that applied to exactly this situation, a bad faith judicial challenge to the trust's founding validity. She found it on page 93. A clause her father had apparently added in the final week before the trust was signed. A provision Nathan had flagged at the time as unusually aggressive, and which Richard Harrington had insisted on keeping. The clause stated, in the dense and immovable language of a man who had built things to last, that any legal challenge to the trust's founding validity, if subsequently proven to be filed in bad faith or at the direction of a party with a demonstrable financial interest in the trust's dissolution, would result in the automatic trebling of all damages awarded to the trust's beneficiary. Trebling triple damages against William Hatch. She called Nathan at 11:30 p.m. Page 93, she said. A silence. She heard him turning pages. Then, Claire. His voice had that quality again, the one she'd first heard on the night of the eviction. Relief. The sound of a man who has been waiting for a very long time for something to be seen. Your father put this in specifically because he worried about bad faith litigation. I know why he put it in, she said. Make sure Whitfield knows about it before the hearing tomorrow. And Nathan, I need Margaret in a room with me first thing in the morning. She closed the laptop. She looked at the mahogany frame across the room, her father looking back at her through the legal language of a man who had planned for every version of this night. She slept 6 hours, the best 6 hours she'd had in weeks. Margaret Donovan arrived at the estate at 8 a.m. in a taxi she'd paid for with cash from the bottom of her pearled handbag, the last of what she had. She had been in a motel for 9 days. Not a bad motel. Margaret was constitutionally incapable of choosing a bad motel, but a mid-range one, the kind with a continental breakfast and a key card that sometimes needed 2 attempts, which Margaret found deeply undignified. She had made the call to Nathan from the room's armchair on the 7th night, sitting in the dark with the television off because the noise felt wrong for what she was doing. She had held her phone for a long time before dialing. Not from sentiment, from calculation. Margaret Donovan had been calculating her survival her entire life, and she was very good at it, and she understood, sitting in that motel room, that she had one piece remaining on a board that had otherwise been cleared. She walked through the front gate of the Harrington estate, and the irony of requiring an escort to enter a house she had lived in for 14 months as if she owned it was not lost on her. She felt it. She didn't show it. Claire was at the dining room table, Nathan beside her, a recording device between them, visible and unambiguous. Claire looked up when Margaret entered and said nothing. She gestured to the chair across from her. Margaret sat, She looked at Claire, really looked at her, possibly for the first time since they had occupied the same house. What she saw was not the quiet, tired, deferential young woman she had spent 14 months dismissing. What she saw was something that had been forged, something that had gone through heat and pressure and come out a different material entirely. She reached into her handbag and set a folded document on the table. "Senatorial letterhead," she said. "One of Hatch's handlers left it during a meeting he held at this estate 14 months ago. I arranged the meeting. I was present." She looked at Claire steadily. "I didn't know then what I know now about who was ultimately giving the instructions. I knew Derek was involved with people above Troy. I didn't know how far above." A pause. "I kept it because I keep everything that might be useful. This is me deciding what it's useful for." Nathan picked up the document without touching the surface, careful, forensically aware. He read it. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes moved. He slid it to Claire. It was a single page, a briefing note on official Senate office letterhead outlining the Harrington mineral rights acquisition timeline, referencing the trust structure by name, and detailing the recommended approach for compromising it from the inside. It was dated 14 months ago. It was initialed at the bottom by Raymond Carr. It was the direct link between Senator Hatch's office and the operation against Claire's home. Red circle, stop right here. Because what you are watching right now, a woman sitting across from the mother-in-law who threw bags at her while she was 8 months pregnant, receiving the one document that could bring down a United States senator. This is the kind of moment that only happens in real life when someone has been through everything and refused to break. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments right now. We have viewers from all over the world on this channel, and we want to see every single flag in those comments. And tell us, do you think Claire should use Margaret's document and let her walk? Or should Margaret face the full weight of everything she did? Comment your verdict below. We are pushing hard to 1,000 subscribers, and this community is almost there. If this story has you gripping your phone right now, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to see part 2. Every subscriber makes part 3 possible. 1,000 subscribers. Let's finish this together. Now back to the table. Claire set the document down. She looked at Margaret for a long time. Long enough that Margaret, who had looked at people across tables her entire life and never been the first to look away, felt something shift in her chest that she refused to name as discomfort, but which was exactly that. "Here is the deal," Claire said. Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. "You testify fully. Everything, the shell registrations, the meetings, the mail you intercepted, every instruction you received and every instruction you gave. You cooperate completely with Agent Whitfield's investigation. You give us this document and every other document, communication, or piece of information you have retained." She paused. "In exchange, I will not push for the maximum sentence. Nathan will communicate our cooperation to the prosecutor." Margaret nodded once, tight, controlled. "But first," Claire said, "I need you to say it out loud on this recording." She looked at her directly. "Everything you did to me in this house, I need you to say it." The room was completely silent. Margaret looked at the recording device, then at Claire, and something moved across her face, not remorse, exactly, not yet, but the specific and unfamiliar experience of a woman who has run out of angles and is sitting across from the only exit still available. She began to talk. It took 47 minutes. Margaret spoke with the contained, sequential precision of a woman who had organized her thoughts in a motel room for 9 days and was now delivering them with the accuracy of someone who understands that the quality of this performance determines the quality of her remaining future. She described everything. The call she made to find Vanessa, the meeting she arranged between Hatch's handlers and Derek inside this house, the shell company registrations, her handwriting on 2 of the founding documents, her signature as a witness on a 3rd, the mail she intercepted from Nathan's firm, 3 letters. She confirmed, not 1, 3. She had been removing correspondence from the estate's mail for 8 months before the eviction, redirecting anything from Cross and Harrington, estate legal associates, before Claire could see it. She described the birthday card she stole. She described the $50. The pearl earring. She produced it from her handbag and set it on the table, which was somehow the most arresting gesture of the entire 47 minutes. The earring sitting on the polished dining table of the house it had been stolen from. Nobody said anything about it. Claire looked at it once and looked away. She described the day of the eviction, packing the bags, the locksmith, Vanessa arriving, the sequence of it. She described throwing the bag. She did not minimize this. Nathan had clearly communicated that minimization was not available to her today. When she finished, the room was quiet. Nathan stopped the recording. Claire looked at the earring on the table for a moment. Then she slid it to her side and picked it up. "One more thing," Claire said. "The hearing is in 14 hours. I need you to testify in court this afternoon about this document and the meeting where it was left. On record, sworn testimony." Margaret looked at her. "That wasn't part of the agreement." "It is now," Claire said. "Because in 14 hours, a federal judge who has been making favorable rulings for William Hatch for a decade is going to try to permanently compromise my father's trust instrument. And your testimony, combined with this document and the car recordings, is the difference between Hatch winning that hearing and Hatch walking into the worst moment of his 22-year career." She looked at her steadily. "You helped build what he used to come after this house. You are going to help me take it apart. That is the deal." Margaret looked at the mahogany frame above the fireplace, the document inside it, the note card beside it. "Everything I built for you." She had lived in this house for 14 months and had never once read that note card closely enough to understand it. She read it now. She looked back at Claire. "What time?" she said. The hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 11:47 p.m. the night before, Nathan Cross was leaving his office building when 2 men approached him from the parking structure's shadow with the unhurried, deliberate movement of people who have decided what they are going to do before they arrive, and are simply completing the errand. The attack was professional and fast, designed to injure, not to kill, specifically because a dead attorney creates a different category of federal problem than an injured one. They left Nathan on the ground with 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and a concussion that would keep him horizontal for 72 hours under medical instruction. His phone was still in his hand. He called Claire before he called an ambulance. She answered on the second ring. "Nathan." His voice was altered, compressed, careful, the voice of someone managing pain while speaking. "I'm fine. Listen to me, I'm fine." 2 men, parking structure. A breath. "Hatch is trying to remove me from the trustee position before the hearing, if I can't appear." "You don't need to appear," Claire said. Her voice was completely steady. She was standing in the nursery in the dark where she had been unable to sleep, one hand on her belly. "I have the document, I have the recordings. Whitfield has the voice analysis confirmation. We have Margaret." A pause. "Call an ambulance right now, Nathan. I will handle the hearing." She hung up. She called Whitfield. She called the trust's secondary legal counsel, a woman named Patricia Osai, who had been briefed on every development for the past 72 hours and who answered her phone at midnight with the calm, immediate readiness of someone who had been expecting this call. Patricia would appear at the hearing in Nathan's place. She would bring everything. Claire set her phone down. And then, with the specific, timing is everything cruelty of a body that has been waiting for a moment of crisis to make its own announcement, the first contraction arrived. She stood very still. She looked at the Paper Star Mobile above the unfinished crib. She timed it, 12 minutes. She called her ob. She called her mother in Portland, who had been waiting for this call for 3 weeks, and answered with the specific, fully awake immediacy of a woman who has been sleeping with her phone at maximum volume. She called the estate's security team and told them she needed someone to stay with her until her mother arrived. She did not stop working. Between contractions, she directed Patricia on the hearing strategy, the sequencing of evidence, the order in which the car recordings should be presented, the precise moment to introduce Margaret's document for maximum impact on the judicial record. She sent 3 emails. She reviewed the trust's page 93 provision one final time and forwarded it to Patricia with specific annotation. At 3 a.m. her mother arrived, breathless and warm and exactly what was needed, and held Claire's hand between contractions while Claire finished the last email on her phone. "You can stop working now," her mother said. "I'll stop at 9 a.m. when the freeze lifts," Claire said. A contraction, she breathed through it. "After that I'll stop." Her mother looked at her with the expression of a woman recognizing her own daughter completely for the first time. "You're exactly like your father," she said quietly. Claire breathed out. "I know," she said. "I'm counting on it." Room at 1:52 p.m. with the specific energy of a woman who has 8 pieces of devastating evidence, a clear conscience, and absolutely no interest in making this comfortable for anyone. Judge Arthur Pennell was 67, heavyset, with the resigned, slightly bored expression of a man who has presided over enough proceedings to have stopped fully attending them. He had reviewed Hatch's motion the previous evening and found the grounds fabricated as they were legally sufficient to proceed. He had done this before for Hatch-adjacent interests. The pattern was established. The ruling was prepared. This was supposed to be administrative. 40 minutes. Done by 3. Patricia set her materials on the defense table, and the first thing she placed on the surface in plain sight was a printed transcript of Carr's voice recordings, all 3, with a cover sheet marked Federal Bureau of Investigation Voice Analysis, 96.7% confidence, RAYMONDCARR, Chief of Staff, Office of Senator William Hatch. Pennell looked at the cover sheet from the bench. Something in his bored expression adjusted. Patricia presented in sequence. The recordings first played in their entirety, Carr's voice directing Derek on which documents to forge, which accounts to activate, which timeline to follow. The Cayman account documentation linking those instructions to Hatch's office. Margaret's sworn testimony, delivered via recorded deposition taken that morning, Margaret's voice, flat and detailed and entirely cooperative, describing the meeting at the Harrington estate, the document left behind, her role in the operations infrastructure. And finally, the document itself, senatorial letterhead, Carr's initials, the Harrington Trust named explicitly, entered into the federal record as Exhibit 14. Then Patricia introduced page 93. The bad faith litigation clause, the trebling provision, the automatic tripling of all damages if the challenge was proven to have been filed at the direction of a party with demonstrable financial interest in the trust's dissolution. She looked at Judge Pennell. She said, with the measured, unhurried clarity of a woman who understands the weight of every word she is about to say in a federal courtroom, "Your Honor, we are prepared to demonstrate that this motion was filed at the direct instruction of Senator William Hatch's office, using a judicial relationship cultivated over a decade for precisely this kind of intervention. We are further prepared to demonstrate that Your Honor has ruled in Hatch-adjacent matters on 3 prior occasions. We are not at this time filing a formal motion for recusal, but we are placing this on the record, clearly, completely, permanently." The courtroom was very quiet. Pennell looked at Exhibit 14 for a long time. At 3:17 p.m. he dismissed the motion. The asset freeze was lifted. The trust protections were reinstated. He did not make eye contact with anyone as he left the bench. At 4:02 p.m., Agent Whitfield executed an arrest warrant for Raymond Carr at the Capitol building. Carr, who had been monitoring the hearing's outcome in real time, was already moving toward a side exit when 2 agents came through the main door. He stopped. He looked at them. He calculated for approximately 3 seconds, the specific, rapid calculation of a man assessing whether running is viable, and then he stopped calculating and put his hands up. At 4:45 p.m., Claire Harrington Donovan gave birth to a girl. 7 pounds 2 ounces, healthy, furious, wonderfully, defiantly stubborn. She named her Eleanor Richard Harrington Donovan, Eleanor for strength, Richard for the man who made sure she had a home to come home to. Senator William Hatch had known about Carr's arrest for 18 hours before he took the stage at the National Defense Infrastructure Summit. He had spent those 18 hours in a series of conversations with lawyers, advisors, and allies that had grown progressively shorter as the people on the other end of the phone recalibrated their own positions and decided that proximity to William Hatch had become a different kind of asset than it used to be. He had spent 2 hours on the phone with his wife, who had the flat, carefully modulated voice of a woman who had been married to a powerful man long enough to have prepared for this phone call years ago. He had looked at Liberty, his Labrador, who looked back with the uncomplicated trust of a creature that does not read federal indictments. His lawyers told him not to appear at the summit. He appeared anyway, because 22 years in Washington had built in him a specific structural inability to retreat, the kind of arrogance that functions as a career asset until the one moment it becomes a fatal liability. He believed, walking onto that stage, that a man of his stature and his connections and his 22-year institutional presence could absorb even this, could manage even this, that there was a move available to him that none of the people around him had yet identified. The ballroom held 400 people, every major defense contractor, every relevant federal official, 3 international delegations, camera crews from 2 major networks covering the summit's keynote, his face on a screen 12 feet high behind the podium as he walked to the microphone. He gripped the podium, he looked out at the room, he opened his prepared remarks. He was 3 sentences in when he saw them. 2 agents moving through the crowd from opposite sides of the room, not rushing, not dramatic, moving with the same measured, unhurried pace that federal agents move with when they are completely certain of their authority and completely unafraid of resistance. The crowd noticed them before Hatch finished processing what he was seeing. The murmur started at the edges of the room and moved inward like a wave. Hatch looked at the agents. He looked at the room, 400 people, cameras, the 12-foot screen behind him showing his face in real time, large enough that every micro-expression was visible to everyone present. He watched himself on that screen understand what was happening. He let go of the podium. The arrest was quiet, efficient, and completely public. The charges were read: wire fraud, conspiracy, abuse of office, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, in a ballroom of 400 people that had gone so silent you could hear the air conditioning. 3 international delegations watched. 2 camera crews filmed. Every major defense contractor in the country witnessed, in real time, the moment the man whose favor they had been cultivating for years was led away from a podium by federal agents. It was on every network within the hour. 40 minutes after the arrest, in a hospital room across the city, Claire sat up in bed with Eleanor in her arms, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, eyes closed, fingers wrapped around Claire's thumb with the fierce, instinctive grip of someone brand new to the world and already unwilling to let go. Nathan's face on Claire's phone screen, video call, ribs bandaged, smiling despite it. Her mother in the chair beside the bed with her hand over her mouth. Whitfield sent a single text, "Done." Claire looked at her daughter's face. "It's done, Eleanor," she said quietly. "It's done." 3 weeks later, morning. The estate was warm in the way it had not been warm for years. Not the performative warmth of a house trying to appear inhabited, but the deep, specific warmth of a place that knows who it belongs to and has stopped pretending otherwise. The mineral rights bidding had begun 4 days after Hatch's arrest, once the trust's legal team had confirmed that the estate's protections were fully reinstated, and the federal investigation had moved sufficiently forward to clear the property of any ancillary legal entanglement. Three of the largest energy and defense companies in the world entered a formal bidding process for a 30-year lease on the Harrington mineral rights. Not a sale. Claire had made this clear from the first communication. Her father built this land for his family. It was not for sale. It was for lease on her terms under her conditions, with full environmental oversight provisions and a community benefit clause that Nathan had drafted and that Claire had read line by line and approved word by word. The opening bid was $40 billion. Claire had sat at the head of the boardroom table for that meeting with a leaner in a carrier against her chest, 3 weeks old, asleep through the entire 2-hour session, with the profound, boneless unconsciousness of someone who has no concerns yet and trusts completely that the person holding her has handled everything. Claire conducted the meeting with the complete, grounded authority of a woman who has finally and permanently understood what she is worth. She asked precise questions. She requested modifications to 3 terms. She thanked the delegations and told them she would have her team's response within 48 hours. She did not rush. 2 days ago, Derek's attorney had filed for parental rights over a leaner. Gerald, $400 an hour Gerald, had advised Derek that it was his last available leverage, his one remaining pressure point, the one thing that might bring Claire to a negotiating table. He had advised very badly. Claire's response had been assembled within 6 hours of the filing and was so comprehensive, so thoroughly documented, and so supported by the full financial and legal resources of the Harrington Trust that Gerald had called Derek in his holding cell and told him, in the careful language of an attorney who has just fully understood the scale of what he's up against, that he strongly recommended withdrawing the motion. Derek had sat in his cell for a long time after that call. He thought about the bay window, the woman who always stood there, the woman he had driven away from without a glance for 14 months. He thought about what she had been standing on the entire time he was doing it. He withdrew the motion. Now Claire stood at the bay window, the same morning light, a leaner in her arms, the estate quiet and warm and entirely, permanently, unquestionably hers around her. She looked out at the land, 4,200 acres of her father's love made physical, of every decision he made in the last months of his life to ensure that she would always have somewhere to stand. She thought about him sitting across from Nathan in the mahogany study, placing her hand flat on the desk, telling her to always read what she signed. She thought about him in his final weeks building a clause on page 47 of a legal document that would one day remove 3 people from her home without a single day in court. She thought about the note card in the small frame beside the property deed. Everything I built for you. And she understood it now the way she had never understood it before. Not as sentiment, not as generosity, but as the most complete act of love available to a man who knew he was running out of time. He had built her a fortress, and then he had trusted her to understand what it was for. She looked down at Eleanor. Eleanor looked back at her, unfocused, entirely trusting, with the open, unguarded gaze of someone who has arrived in the world and found it safe, because the person holding her has made it so. "This is yours, Eleanor," Claire said, quietly, completely. The way her father used to say things when he meant them past the point of revision. All of it, the house and the land and everything beneath it, and nobody. She looked out at the 4,200 acres, at the light on the ground, at the patient, immovable earth her father had loved. Nobody will ever take it from you. She stood there for a long time. Behind her, the mahogany frame caught the morning light. The wax seal glinted. The note card beside it, slightly slanted, written in the hand of a man who had loved his daughter from the beginning and had planned for her from the end, held its words in the warm, quiet air of a room that had tried to be taken and had refused. "For my Claire Bear, everything I built for you." The camera pulled back slowly, through the window, up and over the driveway, over the gate, over 4,200 acres of the most valuable land in America stretching in every direction in the morning light, Beneath it, right now, $500 billion of patient, irreplaceable earth. Her father's gift. Her daughter's inheritance. Waiting. Permanent. Entirely hers. She was 8 months pregnant and they thought she had nothing. She had everything. She just hadn't read the deed yet. End of part 2. Speech balloon, we need to hear from you. Drop your country in the comments right now. Tell us what you felt when Hatch was arrested at that podium. Tell us if you think Derek deserved more. Tell us what you want to see if there is a part 3. And most importantly, was justice enough? Or do you want more? Comment below. If this story moved something in you, subscribe. Share part 2 with someone who stayed up watching part 1. We are at the finish line of 1,000 subscribers and every single one of you gets us there. Hit the button right now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for every comment, every share, every subscriber. This community made this story worth telling. Fire.